as I've gotten older throughout the years, I think that a lot of people, or at least myself in particular, need to zoom out and really see the whole total package of what's going on. It's not gonna change in a month, maybe 1 year or 5 years down the road. But to be able to think big picture,
Correct.
zoom out and see those little details in your life that you can better yourself in so that they pay
Yeah,
off in the
and
future.
as you're starting to filter and scan your environment and make better strategic decisions as consumers out there, we can determine is when is the time to buy a house versus rent. When we're going in terms of shopping and getting a car and a vehicle, am I going to go feel efficient or do I want to get something that's cool and colorful and sporty? To basically when we're getting to saving and investing. Trying to, if you follow the principle of the contrarian mindset versus keeping up, as they say,
Yeah.
keeping up with the Kardashians or doing as keeping up with the Joneses, but following against the grain, basically you win by being the contrarian.
Yeah. To be different.
By being different, because while people are fearful, you're greedy. And while people are greedy, you're fearful.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea of what the contrarian does.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ascending Thoughts with William Rogers, the podcast and show where we speak about the tumultuous times and the strategies of the day of how to overcome everything. My name is Brian. I'd like to welcome Mr. Rogers.
Good afternoon. Welcome, neighbors. It's a beautiful day to podcast.
Following up from the last 2 weeks of the show, I just want to get back started. What's going on? What's going on? Current event news, things like that.
Well, just a couple of the core in terms of as people are coming out of the summer and into fall is just basically right now, where is the economy? And then also too, we have the midterm elections coming up just right around in less than 60 days. So those are both tied to in terms of kind of a barometer of people's overall feeling of the economy. And just for the most part it's a mix, meaning that there's no one clear cut answer as whether if the economy's sour or great. It's complicated.
Yeah, it seems like it's a little shaky right now, speaking to a few different people. Can you dive more into that for families and individuals and also as business owners?
Well, from a macro level, without a doubt, we are in a slowdown. You've definitely seen in terms of the stock markets considerably, whereas versus their highs of several months ago, and especially what crypto prices, and we're seeing it in real estate, definitely where once heated markets have softened. Rates have been a tremendous factor is because interest rates have risen so fast, and the Federal Reserve is probably going to be raising rates again here shortly, sometime this month. But on the positive side, we've seen gas come down considerably versus its high where it was just getting over $6 a gallon. And I think in our local area, it's been down $1.30. And a lot of the earlier supply shocks that we're seeing in terms of store shelves and prices through the roof, that's down to normal. Hiring just still seems strong. And when you look month to month overall in the jobs numbers and report, we don't see in terms of any massive layoffs. We still see as a good size clip, well over 250,000, 300,000 in terms of new jobs being created each month. Like I said, all in all, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, you touched on so many different points there. I wanted to see if you can elaborate more on a little bit of the housing, but also you touched on the stock market that was pulling back just a little bit. What do you think about?
The stock market has pulled back a lot from versus its highs. I would say it's down for a lot, probably between 20 and 30%. I think when we have to address in terms of for the people and the viewers is we have essentially two types of economies, and people have felt that for the longest times. You have the workforce, what's called the Main Street economy, check economy, and for them, their view of the world is what it costs to fill my gas tank and put food on the table and pay my rent and pay my bills. And those have been normalizing a bit versus where they were. So we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. Whereas when we talk on the other side of the economy, people who own stocks, who own real estate and own investments, which isn't always the majority of the people, those have been suffering, but we also have to look them in proper context. Many of them got fueled and pumped up because of artificially low interest rates. So in many respects, you have to look at they were in a bubble position to begin with. When we were looking at what Bitcoin at one point was approaching 80,000 and now it's down to 20, that's illusory. That's not real. And so we don't in trying to distinguish in an overall health of the economy. And what I always advise people, we want to see what the paycheck side of the economy is doing. Because as jobs are getting created or they're contracting or there are massive layoffs, pricing, what it costs to get, gas, food, utilities, all those core staples, that is more important versus in terms of real estate prices coming down or stock prices is. But a lot of times people confuse and conflate that as the economy.
Yeah. It seems that real estate and the stocks and securities was a little bit of a bubble, and it's coming back down to itself.
So one of the, I think, mistakes that people make in overall in assessing the economic situation is viewing that as the economy.
Yeah.
When the economy really is your personal view of your personal situation and your family. It's your personal paycheck. And that's security. And if people are in terms of in a stable job and in the incomes that they're making, they're able to support themselves and have a little bit left over and maybe get one or two of those luxuries that they desire. Most people feel in a pretty good position. The building in terms of angst and what we saw in the earlier part of the year was that things were just getting out of control. And that concern was that my income may not keep up with price increases. So I felt like the situation was just out of my hands. And that has improved considerably.
Yeah, I feel that the summer months, for everybody's personal finances, I feel that the summer months, the costs were increasing and they were on the rise, but I feel that pullback is trending down so that people are feeling more comfortable.
They're starting to. It's just not in terms of enough, because a lot of when we looked at these overall shocks that we saw, and we were coming out of the pandemic, so there's that one factor, but it's still not over. We have this BA2 Omicron variant that works its way throughout the world that causes these ripple effects in supply chains. Secondly, we had these certain types of materials like a chip shortage. As those start to work out, those had ripple effects in time of consumer goods. And then as this prolonged war, as we've had in Ukraine, what that did, the immediate spike in global energy markets, the global energy markets have started to come back. But also to keep in mind, and what I want to forewarn in terms of the public out there, we're also coming into Atlantic and Gulf hurricane season. And so we have a potential another shock out there, because when we have massive storms, takes a lot of these refineries and other capabilities offline, we tend to see another shock. So we're not out of the woods yet when we say the overall specter of the boogeyman of inflation. We're getting what we call fits and starts.
Yeah, and I think we saw that last week for being here in California with the heat wave and with the wildfires up north.
And in addition, potential brownouts and all kinds of things.
Yeah, it seems sort of trending over the last 10 or 15 years for myself. It seems that's the norm, and we just have to get through it. But where we can measure it on the spikes, the crest, and the trough of the ups and downs of those.
Correct.
So just what can we do as individuals to help with our personal finances that we can get through those spikes?
So more importantly, we're starting to see there's some common themes in here when we're talking about energy prices. We talk in terms of about whether it's food, groceries, and staple and housing. We have to go and look at how we can fundamentally change some of those. So let's take, for example, in energy. One of the biggest pushes, and California is trying to do, and others, is getting more people into electric cars. One of the basics and easiest things is to increase fuel efficiency. A lot of people have a lot of disdain for it. Basically, whether it's in terms of work, it's a lifestyle choice. But I'm just telling you, the more and more that we get committed to improving overall fuel efficiency. So in addition, when we use in terms of our overall energy consumption in buildings, air conditioning, that's energy in terms of lights and everything. If we look throughout all, that is going to be the biggest fundamental radical game changer that we have, versus throwing our hands up and saying we're at the whims of rising prices. We need to do something on the demand side.
Yeah, I feel like that side of the equation definitely needs to be looked at.
We as people, meaning we need to take more active role. And unfortunately, Brian, is that too many people have, and forgive me for saying this, but it has to be said, they bitch and complain that the prices are going up, versus saying as what actions am I going to do to be a counterbalance. When I was young, I loved fancy cars, my Ford Mustangs and all that. And I loved in terms of those muscle cars. And those were great when it was $2 a gallon. And I remember it got to $3, and it got to $3.30, and it got to $3.50. And I started all of a sudden getting to a point, my monthly gas bill was more than what my car payment was. Do I really get that much entertainment from it? So I, in a form of maturity, decided I started looking at Honda Civics and Honda Hybrids and a lot of those others. All I'm just trying to do is encourage we can, as consumers, lean into, because I remember during in terms of time when you wanted an electric car, you wanted a hybrid, you didn't really have many choices. There was back in terms of around the time of between 2008 and 2010, first came out the Chevy Volt. There was the Toyota Prius hybrid that came out.
Just a few
There
manufacturers.
was the Nissan Leaf. And then Tesla had a very high-end car. But I'm just saying accessible for people. That was about it.
Just a few manufacturers.
That was about it. Nowadays, you have a wide in terms of swath in terms of in 2022. So if you really want in terms of a hybrid electric car, you can have it in terms of in there, which is great. In addition, in terms of just how our overall homes, and a lot of times people are in older homes and older properties, those tend to be hogs of energy consumption. And you don't know how many people, and I work in terms of clients, I'm hearing about $800 a month utility bills. That's a significant bite in anyone's income when you add in terms of all those up. So energy efficiency is one aspect we have to take ownership of as individuals, of what we can do as better consumers and better shoppers. And when we buy, we select places that we rent, whatever that it is, places that we live, we have to look at as a factor. You buy a car, you rent an apartment, you buy a house, you need to make it as part of your criteria as what's the energy efficiency.
Yeah. I think the same way. I have my core area where I tend to stick driving distance wise and everything. And I'll go outside of that every so often for those luxury things and for leisure. But generally my core is just very tight knit.
The other positive I do want to highlight is California had an incredible heat wave that put tremendous demand on the system, but the system held pretty good because the amount of solar and other diverse forms of energy that we have. What was interesting, Texas a year ago went through a massive blizzard and they didn't hold, and people were literally without
pipes.
And frozen pipes, and that they just didn't have in the diversity. So the other aspect is too, what we have to encourage in terms of as people, as consumers, as citizens, as voters, you need to have diversity. We can't just solely rely on fossil fuels. There's obviously, in terms of the impact of the environment, there's the political consequence that comes with it, but more importantly is how we get it, the cost of it, the piping of it, the transport. So having solar, having wind, having alternative forms is, I just view it as an imperative.
Yeah. I think we need a mix of all those to cumulatively come forward and to better everything.
Yeah, as well as potentially nuclear. I mean, we have to look at all in terms of all of the above too, because basically is with the population, the demands is we have a growing in terms of demand, but how we're going to attack this in a long term, as I talked in a previous show about structural inflation, is we need to deal with the demand side. That's better efficiency, but we also need to diversify energy sources.
Yeah.
That's the only way we're going to address this, because we can't drill our way out of it, because unfortunately, to drill our way out of it, we're going to have to more and more rely on unsavory partnerships with countries and dictatorships that totally go counter in terms of against our values and make bargains and deals that we should not be making in a geopolitical sense.
Yeah. Anyway, so many things we just talked about. I wanted to switch topics here a little bit more with the Inflation Reduction Act and the current news on that. And it says that we can lower the prescription drug costs, lower energy costs, and then also lower the healthcare costs for everybody in the country. What impact on the viewers do you see that all of that is going to entail for their personal finances, helping them keep money in their pockets?
So when we talk about structural factors, as we touch upon in the show, good policy, good legislation is meant to aid in that. So when we talk about in terms of, let's take a big healthcare cost is prescription drug prices. Medicare is basically one of the largest in terms of blocks out there of insurers, and it covers the entire population over the age of 65. They have legally and legislatively been unable to negotiate pharmaceutical prices. You and I, if we truly believe in a free enterprise and fair market, we should be able to price shop. That just seems fair.
Yeah.
Medicare has been unable to because they have a set of rules and laws. And remember, Medicare is representing the population that's over the age of 60. And this is the age of the population that will have the highest healthcare costs as an overall of the economy, which is inevitable. And one of the biggest aspects of the typical costs, not that people are sick and ailing, is they take frequent medications and pharmaceuticals, and not having that ability to negotiate because you're buying in bulk. Normally, big corporations negotiate buy in bulk. Yep. The U.S. military does it. Why Medicare doesn't? So that's what the Inflation Reduction Act did. Politically, people didn't want to do that, which just seems appalling. But that's what was achieved in terms of in that. Secondly, on the healthcare side is to deal with those. As you can understand, you got to get your own health care. Maybe a few years ago, you're on your parents' policy, but as more and more of your peer group, you're starting to find out how expensive it is to have coverage, let alone go to the doctor. So what it was trying to do was replenish premium subsidies, because a lot of people can't afford the full premium. They need a little premium assistance. And so that was the second prong in terms of doing that. And that's necessary because statistically, and everything shows is people don't have coverage, don't go to the doctor, and then they wait until they have an acute issue, and then it just becomes more expensive to treat. People who tend to have coverage tend to go get a frequent checkup, tend to be up on that and nip it in the bud. So they go hand in hand. If you want to nip things and be fiscally responsible, you need to make sure you have the widest amount of population that has healthcare coverage. And this was to address those who are having in terms of in their being able to afford it.
Sounds good. And then we did speak about the energy. If you want to just talk a little bit about that for lowering the energy costs a little bit.
Well, a couple things is the expanding of those electric vehicle credits to not only include new vehicles, but used vehicles.
Okay.
And also commercial vehicles. So we're going to have in terms of how that, but also too, the massive incentives and tax credits be given to those who implement energy efficiency improvements. Because as I was stating earlier, you really want to address some of this frequent volatility. Imagine we're going in our lives and we're trying to budget. We want things to be relatively stable.
Yes.
If you go a week to the grocery store and you're accustomed to paying $150 a week, next week it's $200, or another week that it's 80, it was great, it went down, but that instability is hard for you to plan, like price stability. That's what fuel was doing. And then when you flip on the lights, and then when we have a heat wave, do I run the AC and all that? That adds to people's angst. So the fact that addressing energy efficiency is meant to bring stability. We got to bring out some demand. How you bring out demand? You have efficiency, as well as too, you need to have other diverse forms. And what it's going to do is increase the amount of solar and wind and other forms of energy. So it's going to address those two on those two fronts for the long term.
And put forth more money into the whole infrastructure as we see.
Correct.
The
electric
cities.
vehicle charging stations, because like, for example, a lot of people live in an apartment or a condo or wherever
that's a big one.
that you want an electric vehicle, but I can't plug it in anymore. So just trying to deal with it all holistically to be what I call the win-win.
I know so many people my age that would love to have the electric vehicle, but there's no place to charge it other than the superchargers where you go to the mall and they're all taken up.
Or it's inconvenient and out of your way and you just don't have in terms of no. So it's just basically to start thinking big of laying in terms of that foundation there. And in many respects, that as a whole ends up bending that curve of the structural inflation.
Another part of that bill that's being in process right now is that 15% corporate tax. Can you elaborate on that and how is that going to impact?
So that is meant to be more of a fiscal responsibility and deficit reduction. That's not meant to address inflation. What people have to realize, a lot of times in legislation, we have a couple of different policy objectives. One could be we want to spend, meaning we're going to take government resources, and like we're saying is we're giving tax breaks. We're spending in terms of on that, but on another flip side, we want to be fiscally responsible. How do we pay for it?
Yeah.
So the 15% corporate minimum tax is meant to allow to be what we call budget neutral. That means that if we're going to make these investments by covering people's health care who can't afford it, meaning that the government is putting out resources, or we're going to put out these tax credits for vehicles and solar, we need to recoup somehow.
Yeah.
And the belief has been a fairness issue. And a fairness issue, which I think there's a large consensus of the public, is that a lot of working people like yourselves pay taxes. You see it in your paycheck. You see it what comes out. But big, large corporations, Google, Apple, Intel, all of a sudden pay very little taxes. And the idea is not to penalize anyone. It's just to level the playing field. Pay a minimum tax and pay your fair share. That's all that it's meant. And that's what the 15% is. So if they report earnings and profits for Wall Street, but they have negative profits on their tax return, how does that jive? That's the whole idea.
Gotcha. And do you see that 15% corporate tax? Do you see that in the future expanding, maybe higher or lower, depending on what's going on with the budget deficit?
15%, just so that you know, that number is a worldwide consensus because the tax base, the eroding of the tax base by multinational corporations has been a big concern over the last 20 years. As you have technology, digital commerce, companies can do business anywhere.
Yeah.
And they don't need a physical warehouse plant manufacturing to be domestically in Germany or Japan, but they can sell into those markets. And so evading the tax base has been one of the biggest concerns. And Organization of Economic Cooperation's landing at what we call 15% minimum tax worldwide so that people aren't just shifting profits around to tax haven.
That makes sense for sure. Let's see. I have another here question about going back to the gas prices. Do you see that the drop on average, I'm seeing $1.30. Do you see a drop on that continuing? And do you see that is slowly going to be having a...
I think I would honestly say it's a to be continued depending how bad of a hurricane season we have. Because historically what does happen is when we get a real bad hurricane season, which traditionally goes through the Gulf of Mexico, we have a lot of drilling in the Gulf. We also have a lot of refineries, and the refineries is what delivers us the gas, and those can get shut offline. So that can cause a supply shock. So all I'm just saying is, in terms of our viewers out there, wait till the latter half when we get through, because if we have some big, massive storms, we can have some price shocks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The Ukraine-Russia impact is starting to stabilize because that is what the energy markets had driven up earlier in the year. That part has stabilized. My bigger concern, what's laying out in the falls, how bad of a storm season we have.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can't really control that, but just check all you viewers at home, keep an eye on the weather.
It just shows over and all more and more the impact that we're experiencing with Mother Nature as a result of global warming. When you look at the drying up of the lakes and Lake Mead, of the exhausting of water resources, of what's available Colorado River, you see these massive wildfires and these massive hurricanes. That is the real fundamental economic consequence of global warming.
Gotcha. And so you say the global warming, but we are in September. It's one of the warmest months of the year. So we will see in 6 months for what the future holds for winter. If it gets crazy snow for up north, and we'll just go from there.
Yeah, it's hopefully, and depends upon that we have in terms of an adequate rain season. Much of the West has been relatively dry and a historic 8-year drought.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that. I have here to move on again for another topic I want to talk about was, are there any signals or new indicators coming into this fall season of a growth in the economy, or are we on the possibility of the dreaded word of recession?
I think basically on the data that we're looking at, we are definitely in a slowdown, and we're probably in the midst of a recession. The term that's being thrown around is, are we in what's called a soft landing? Is soft landing somewhat of a Goldilocks? Can we do it? But we're definitely in what we call a slowdown economically. I don't think that we are in what you would honestly characterize as an economic malaise, because to be in an economic malaise, you would literally have to have large amounts of layoffs. And when you look at the month-to-month jobs reports of new hiring, it would turn negative. And we've been well over 250,000, 300,000 a month. So again, that is the one key indicator everyone wants to watch every month, because corporate profits coming down, some in the slowdown, yes, that could be an early indicator of things to come down the pike. But what I would preface to a lot of people is, remember, a lot of companies and a lot of businesses had what I call spiked pent-up profits during the COVID time. We pumped $6 trillion in the economy. People were at home buying stuff on Amazon.com and online. Remember, that was a sugar high. And I think that we have to take it a little bit economically as a grain of salt. So that's what I'm saying. It's to be continued as long as that hiring still seems. When you're noticing in hospitality and restaurants, they're still kind of adding. Noticing in travel where there's been shortages, pilots and flight attendants, all that, but they're still adding. They're not contracting. We've had cancellations, but it wasn't because of demand. It was because of lack of workforce. If we're still adding, that's what I would say is we're in a healthy contraction, but we're basically bringing in the workforce.
Yeah, I think it's such a peculiar time. And if you zoom out for the viewers at home, as you said, with the 2020 sugar high for online ordering people at home,
of course,
I think that when you look at it from that influx and spike, I think that we're pulling back and we are, quote unquote, everybody's saying recession, but I don't see that it's the 1929 recession. I think that it's just more of a settling.
Yeah.
In the tide.
Remember, there's a lot of psychology that goes on in economics because a lot of times our instinct is doom and gloom, and there's inevitable ups and downs, what we call in a boom and bust in every economic cycle. And a lot of it can be healthy, but it doesn't imply a crash or depression. Yeah. Some recessions can go down and be mild, and others can be massive, like that crash that we saw in that early part in 2020 was massive. It's like you're falling off of, is similar to what we went through in 2008, but those are totally different in terms of circumstance. This one here seems slowed down where it's just a bit more like we're letting air versus a popping of a balloon. And it's just all of a sudden, because the way that you would tell that would happen is you'd start to see some real big, massive layoffs and bankruptcy. You'd start to also see some massive failures out there, mortgage delinquencies, bankruptcy. You would see some what we would call in terms of, in some of that, what you're seeing is profit softening.
Yeah, I haven't seen pretty much any of those. There's jobs to be had. I was reading an article where the payroll's up and we have
wages are still increasing by it in terms of all.
We have jobs out there and everybody's hiring, but it just seems that it's not going to be that drastic. That 2020 dip like we had with COVID that was out of our control.
The other thing that I want to push back on is where you're going to get a lot of people who might be in a naysayer side is because real estate's not going up 20% a year. And I'm looking at real estate going up 20% a year is the definition of an economic malaise. And people are going to think I'm nuts and insane because you're going to have more and more people who can't afford to live in a local area. That's all that's just going to mean. It's just going to benefit a select group of people who own property, but that's not the majority of the paycheck people. So again, some of the 5 hottest cities in the United States for real estate have obviously seen a slowdown in contraction. Good thing. It's a good thing for people who are wanting to try and get in the market and potentially what it might mean for rent prices.
Yeah, the first time home buyers trying to get in, I know just myself looking around for just cruising around, it's just insane. It's such an anomaly what we were going through 2020, 21, and then now.
But that slowdown is what's necessary to bring some health back into the market.
Yeah.
Because I was reading in terms of an article in a study the other day that it would take 40% income growth just to catch up to make housing affordable. And that's not going to happen.
No.
Yeah. Maybe 5% a year at best, but to get to 40% is going to take maybe a decade for people. It's just not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen for the wage earners unless you win
So
big.
we do need to have a healthy contraction in terms of in real estate. And like I said at the beginning, a lot of people will cry foul that the economy is horrible because stock prices, crypto, Bitcoin, and as well as real estate. But that's not the Main Street economy.
No. And I feel that a lot of those people are of the older generation that purchased their home years and years ago. Or
the well-to-do.
Yeah.
You have people who are well-to-do, but that's not necessarily connected to much of the paycheck earning people who are out there.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think we talk actually quite a bit about everything with the Inflation Reduction Act, the price of fuel, energy, gas, healthcare. I know you're a big proponent on healthcare. Everybody should have healthcare, and that should be cost effective for everyone, so everyone's healthy and they can work.
Keep in mind when we look at the overall aspect in a healthy economy and runaway inflation, some of the core forces out there, as we talked in an earlier show, energy, healthcare, cost of education, cost of housing. It's one of the four forces. And so healthcare is just one of those that tends to eat a tremendous amount out of people's budget, what they pay for the cost of coverage and what they pay at the cost of actually getting healthcare service.
Yeah, it seems that those four core items for the legs on the chair, if you have one of them that goes awry, then that chair is not going to be able to be stable.
And as well as the prices aren't stable.
Yeah.
So that's just basically what essentially shatters the foundation for a lot of paycheck earning people who are out there. And that's where we as people, as I've always been a huge advocate, they need to participate, they need to vote, because that's where, as a collective, having good policy and legislation in place to help address some of those structural issues.
Yeah, and I think another part of it is for people to just think clearly about what's going on, bias aside or anything like that. What are the actual fundamentals that we need as a people so that we can ascend to get to those greater heights?
Exactly. And as we addressed on the last show, as we were talking about the theme of education and the forgiveness of student loans, but the overall cost of education and the efficacy of those degrees, it's playing to one of those four forces of the overall structural inflation that's in this economy. But just thinking about, you have a sack you're carrying on a journey, on a hike. You've got four big boulders in there, and one of them's education, and that boulder's only getting bigger.
Yeah.
You know?
You're going to stop one of those days.
You're going to get crushed. And that's what's happening in terms of debt. And then why I'm such a big proponent in terms of healthcare. It's the moral thing to do, but it's also, too, it is basically one of the biggest, I would say, that eats away at most people's budget versus the cost of housing. Those are the top two.
Yeah.
Healthcare and housing.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are your key takeaways here for the viewers today? We covered a vast array of topics today. What do you think was the most important topic for the day today?
Basically, what we want to advocate in terms of our neighbors out there and viewers is you want to start to develop a strategic mindset to scan what's going on in the environment. When we start picking up data to understand how the economy is and how do I react? Because again, making good choices is how we ascend through in terms of in these times. So one of the benefits that we have is if there's an actual economic slowdown is that things can become more affordable and cheap. That's when we want to buy. We don't want to freak out. So just think about in terms of in any type of slowdown, I like to develop a contrarian mindset. I don't like to buy real estate when it's hot. I like to buy it when it's cold.
Yeah.
I don't like to buy stocks when it's hot. I like to buy it when it's cold. So by developing in terms of a contrarian mindset is allowing people to go against the grain to identify good value opportunities to poise yourself to make profit in the future. And it's one of the principles that I've always been guided by throughout in my career.
Yeah, and I think as I've gotten older throughout the years, I think that a lot of people, or at least myself in particular, need to zoom out and really see the whole total package of what's going on. It's not gonna change in a month, maybe 1 year or 5 years down the road. But to be able to think big picture,
Correct.
Zoom out and see those little details in your life that you can better yourself in so that they pay off in the future.
And as you're starting to filter and scan your environment and make better strategic decisions as consumers out there, we can determine is when is the time to buy a house versus rent. When we're going in terms of shopping and getting a car and a vehicle, am I going to go feel efficient, or do I want to get something that's cool and colorful and sporty, to basically when we're getting to saving and investing. But trying to, if you follow the principle of the contrarian mindset versus keeping up, as they say, keeping up with the Kardashians or doing as keeping up with the Joneses, but following against the grain, basically you win by being the contrarian.
Yeah, to be different.
By being different, because while people are fearful, you're greedy. And while people are greedy, you're fearful.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea of what the contrarian does. You're trying to go and identify good value, and then you avoid hysteria and hype.
Yeah, it seems, just be different, sort of be off on your own little island, but also be able to think intelligently about that.
I've been guided by in terms of in my business and investment philosophy that's paid for me.
Well, that's awesome, because it's definitely paid dividends being that contrarian mindset for you over the last 20 years doing business. And yeah, it's definitely done well for you, and I'm really, really glad to be a part of it. And thank you so much for coming on the show for another episode. I want to thank the viewers at home. I think we're going to wrap it up here, and we'll see you for the next podcast.
Thank you, neighbors. See you next time.